Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim, on Friday morning, the House Ways and Means Committee, with 5 days left until the transfer of power to the Republican Party, which took the House in the November elections, they did what they had promised. They finished redacting President Trump's years of tax returns, and they dropped them into the public domain. We're taping this on Friday afternoon, and there are thousands of pages of these documents. And so I'm sure there will be accountants and auditors who are having fun on New Year's Eve going through these and flagging things. But from your perspective, Kim, is there anything so far that sticks out?
No. And that's what makes this release all the more disturbing is, as we have talked about in prior podcasts, the decisions by Democrats to do this is unprecedented. The head of the Ways and Means Committee has a special power to be able to access private taxpayer data. And in past, both sides have been very wary of using this power because no one wanted to set a precedent whereby the majority party was accessing that information and making it public for partisan and political purposes. Well, that is what Democrats have now done here. There isn't really any reason to be putting any of this out into the public beyond Democratic hopes to embarrass Donald Trump, likely by hoping to suggest that the returns show he never made as much money as he always claimed he did, and also to fulfill this long-time left-wing promise they were going to get a hold of them and make them public because the president had refused to release them publicly himself. By the way, something that we at the editorial page felt he should have done. But then again, even after he refused, voters elected him anyway. So this is an unprecedented step. And as far as I can see, and again, this is thousands of pages, to the extent that people have looked through it so far, it's pretty meager stuff. It does seem to show varying amount of tax paid in different years. One year in which he didn't really pay any taxes because it was not a great business year. And so there's some stuff out there and we could go through it, but by and large, I'm not quite sure how this provides any real public purpose.
Well, let me pull out a couple things. One is the losses. Here's the headline from Axios today. Trump's main holding company racked up over $300 million in losses. And seemingly responding to some of this analysis, President Trump has a statement out. He says, "The Trump tax returns once again show how proudly successful I have been and how I've been able to use depreciation and various other tax deductions as an incentive for creating thousands of jobs in magnificent structures and enterprises." And leave aside some of the typical Trumpian hyperbole there, I think he has a point. The Congress is who writes the tax code, including the people on the House Ways and Means Committee, and it is riddled with loopholes and deductions, some of them specifically for real estate companies. And as long as everything that Trump did was within the legal authority of his accountants and so forth, I think he has a reasonable point. And I guess we'll find out in coming days as critics go through this, whether any of these deductions look sketchier than that. But Kate, I find it hard to fault somebody for taking advantage of the deductions and credits and whatnot that Congress writes into the tax code specifically for businesses.
Right, Kyle. And I think Kevin Brady's remarks on this are worth noting. He said that this would leave a stain on the Ways and Means Committee and that the consequences will be significant and Democrats are likely to come to regret these actions and may come to regret it sooner than they think. That was echoing, I think, Mitch McConnell when he was talking about the filibuster for judicial nominees being broken, in basically saying Democrats are unleashing a fury here and they may not be able to control where it goes if you can just release the tax returns of your political opponents. On the substance, Kyle, I think what we're seeing here is basically this is an effort to continue the left's campaign that wealthy people do not pay enough taxes. I think that is really the goal here. If you recall, during tax reform in 2017, the charges against Trump were that he was basically trying to rewrite the tax code to his own benefit. On first inspection of these returns, you do see that the cap on the state and local tax deduction was not a help to him or anybody else who earns a lot of money in a blue state. So that is worth noting, and I think maybe runs a little contrary to what was expected. But I do think the goal here is to suggest that people who are wealthy don't pay enough taxes. And I do think we need to be clear, you don't pay taxes on money that you're losing. And this is what the returns seem to largely show, that he didn't pay many taxes in years that he was losing money. That is an important distinction that I think gets lost. This being a campaign to change the tax code and raise taxes as one of its purposes is all I can think of, because so far there seems to be very little here new that we're learning. One of the takeaways has been that Trump didn't give a lot of money to charity, but we were already aware of that from a lot of reporting during his administration. So to break this norm for that, it doesn't seem to have told us very much in substance. So I can only assume it has other purposes that don't have to do with transparency or educating the public.
Well, I think the point about the state and local tax deduction is a very good one. And pieces of that 2017 tax law were cross-cutting, so the rates went down. On the other hand, some of these deductions went away or were capped or limited. It's a way of broadening the tax base. And so it's hard to know what effect that would have on any specific person's return. But there is some reporting here that the state and local tax deduction in particular was a tax increase on President Trump, which makes sense because he's a very wealthy individual living in a blue city in a blue state with very high tax rates. And so there's some reporting now that in 2019, President Trump reported paying $8.4 million in state and local taxes. And under the old system where state and local tax deduction on the federal return was unlimited, my understanding is he could have deducted all of that from his federal return. And after the 2017 tax law, it was capped at $10,000. And so, Kim, a complicated law like the 2017 tax law includes a lot of provisions in it. But I think Kate makes a great point here that if this was some conspiracy on behalf of the president and his wealthy friends to lower their own taxes, boy, capping the state and local tax deduction is not the way you would go about that.
Yeah, this was one of the more amusing parts of this release, only because of the history here. In order to access these records, Ways and Means did have to state a reasonable legislative purpose of doing so. And they fumbled around for a while. They ultimately alighted on this somewhat obscure provision within the IRS that requires presidential audits, and they claimed that they needed to conduct oversight to ensure that the IRS was adequately doing those audits of Trump's tax returns. But when they first got rolling on this and they were fumbling around for different excuses to say why they needed, one of their arguments was, we need to look at this to ensure that the president didn't pass this tax law entirely to benefit himself. And so it's kind of funny that now that these returns are out, in fact, what we find is that a key aspect of that tax reform, one of its more controversial aspects, in fact, and I think a great success of that Republican tax reform, is this SALT cap, which looks to have, as you pointed out in the numbers, really have undermined Donald Trump's tax situation. And, as we go through, we may find some more things. It was interesting. I noticed as the New York Times, they very quickly hastened to add that, he may well have benefited from other aspects of the law, in particular deductions, etc. And I'm sure that they will also be running his returns under a microscope to look for that. But yeah, that was a highlight of this. And it just goes to show, look, whenever Republicans attempt to pass tax reform, the complaint from the left is always that only certain people benefit. And the reality, in fact, of the 2017 tax reform is just how broad-based it was and how much it helped so many people across the country.
Thank you, Kim and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.